Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the sixth critical conversation on Project 2025. I'm Reverend Dr. Susan Smith. I'm the Director of the Office of Clergy and Leadership Resource Development. And Marcus?
There is so much at stake. I'm Marcus Tab. I'm the assistant to the director of the Office of Clergy Resource and Development, and there is so much at stake right now. And it is our goal to make sure we educate our friends and network on what is planned. It is nothing less than an attack on our democracy.
Absolutely. So tonight we're going to be talking about the implications for us if the goal of eliminating the Departments of Justice and Defense are come to be. There's really a lot to think about as we move toward the general election, which takes place in just 44 days. So what we hope is that you will learn something that you did not know before tonight and share it with your family and friends. We are honored to have two outstanding guests again this evening who have their fingers and ministries on the pulse of the Black community. Our first guest is the Reverend Anthony Bennett, who I call my brother from another mother. He's the pastor of Mount Airy Baptist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He is a pastor, preacher, teacher, and organizer. He's a native of Los Angeles, California, married to my friend and sister, Donna Thompson Bennett. And they have an amazing church in Bridgeport. He is a graduate of Morehouse College, Union Theological Seminary, and United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. While at Union Theological Seminary, he joined the staff of the St. Paul Community Baptist Church in Brooklyn, New York, under the pastoral leadership of the Reverend Dr. Johnny Ray Youngblood. And there he served as an associate pastor from 1991 to 1993, and then assistant pastor from 1993 to 1994. After his tenure at St. Paul Community Baptist Church, he was called to serve at Mount Airy Baptist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut, as its fifth pastor. Believing in the practical power of prayer, the church's subsequent theme became a praying people with a powerful witness of the perfect God. He is also the chair of the Mount Airy Development Corporation. Marcus?
Our second guest is the Reverend Dr. Earle Fisher, which I'm going to call the Proctorite, the senior pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church, the Blackest church in Memphis, Tennessee. Reverend Earle J. Fisher, PhD, holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Science from Lemoyne Owens College, a Master of Divinity degree from Memphis Theological Seminary, and a PhD in Communication from the University of Memphis. Pastor Earle is the senior pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. Like I said, the Blackest church in Memphis and Shelby County. He's also the founder of #UpTheVote901, a nonpartisan voter empowerment initiative committed to producing political power and increasing voter turnout in Memphis and Shelby County. Dr. Fisher is married to Denise Lloyd Fisher, and he has one son, Jalen Fisher, and one granddaughter, Carter and Little Mama Fisher.
Amen. So we're honored, and we're going to get Dr. Fisher to start us off. But before we do that, we have a video that I think is queued up for us to just kind of get us into the flow of what this conversation tonight will be about. Julie?
Because he wanted desperately for the FBI to drop its investigation into Russian interference into the 2016 election. So it follows that Project 2025 would encourage the next conservative administration to place the FBI under more, quote, politically accountable, end quote, leadership, which are code words for more loyal to the president. It also wants the FBI to stop investigating online misinformation, which is a new initiative that feels more important today than ever. But if Project 2025 has its way, the DOJ wouldn't look into that, just like it wouldn't investigate police misconduct. Another hidden detail in the chapter is the call to, quote, promptly and properly eliminate all existing consent decrees, end quote. Consent decrees, you've heard the word before, the term before, they're handed down by the Department of Justice to local jurisdictions following an investigation into police wrongdoing. Think of it as a court-ordered improvement plan. These decrees usually compel jails to improve their conditions or police departments to consider their tactics and report back to the Justice Department. Project 2025 argues that the DOJ should disclaim its ability to even hand down consent decrees. Another target of this chapter, local and state attorneys who use their own discretion to pursue or not pursue prosecution. Project 2025 calls for the Department of Justice to, quote, initiate legal action against local officials, including district attorneys, who deny American citizens the equal protection of the laws by refusing to prosecute criminal offenses in their jurisdictions, end quote. Now, these were...
So that's some of what is at stake with Project 2025 and its assault on the Justice Department. And one of the reasons we're having these conversations is because we want you all to know what's going on. And we want to know what the implications are of these proposed changes for the Black community. Understand that this stuff is already going on, but that if the administration that is proposing this gets in, it's going to come at us like wildfire. They want to have changes done in 180 days. So Reverend Earle, take us into this conversation about what happens to us as Black people if this is implemented.
Well, thank you, Dr. Smith and Reverend Tab. Peace and love to all of you. It is a gift, as always, to be with the Proctor Network and the Proctor family. It's equally a gift to always be with my elder, my Baba, my OG, Reverend Dr. Anthony Bennett. And so I do want to continue in the vein of what we heard, in a sense, this being the sixth conversation that Proctor has hosted. It is not unreasonable to say, if we haven't grasped the severity of the moment and the implications of this project overall, then we are swimming upstream in a way that might end up drowning far too many of us. And so for us to continue in this conversation is extremely vital and valuable. And there are two things I want to make sure that we do in our time. And Baba Bennett and I have discussed this. So we want to make sure in the time that we have allotted this evening, we are encouraging Black faith leaders, especially preachers and pastors, but not only preachers and pastors. If you are connected to a Black faith community of any stripe or any sort, we want to engage you in these conversations around the implications of Project 2025. And to be clear, we don't just want to offer faith leaders talking points. We are trying to offer you tools to help ground us in necessary conversation and community engagement work that can ultimately impact the outcome of the election. And as a result, it can improve the quality of life for our constituents in our communities and our congregations. So the second thing that we want to make sure we're doing, and Dr. Smith already queued us up in a sense, is fully and faithfully understand the severity of the dangers of this project. Tonight, we'll be talking about, of course, the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense. But I want to acknowledge that many of us exist in communities and in congregational contexts that are wrought with all manner of apathy and anxiety, because it seems like every time an election comes along, we are saying this is the most important and crucial election we've ever experienced. And so I understand, and in some ways even embrace that apathy and that anxiety, but I also respect the authenticity of these claims because of the clips that we've seen here and even the developments we've seen over the last few months. And for those of us who have been unable to righteously and rightfully connect the past administration from 2016 to 2020 and the potential of another administration's turn into further authoritarianism or totalitarianism, which is to say, we have a dictator in the White House, and these plans embedded in this project are intended to provide him with all the more unbridled, unchecked power. And if you don't believe that that's what that's about, Jasmine Crockett, the representative of Texas, was making remarks the other day as they were grilling some of the people who put Project 2025 together. And she highlighted how explicitly the name Trump is mentioned in Project 2025 over 300 times. So as much as people want to make it seem like, or even as much as Trump himself will want to make it seem like this is not about him, at the end of the day, it actually is. And so we believe that the Black faith community has the opportunity to literally shift the trajectory of this election if we can get active, get informed, get engaged, get inspired, and empower our people to turn out. And we also believe that this was also impact and improve the future of the Black community and the Black faith community going forward. So there are a couple of things I just want to pitch as an overview, and then I'll have Baba come in and chime in some. As it relates to the impact on the Department of Justice, you heard some of this from the clip that we just heard. But one of the things I think is the most significant is the fact that it was proposed to cut the Civil Rights Division of the FBI out altogether. And so the clip mentioned consent decrees, which are oversight measures that the federal government put together to try to ensure that local law enforcement agencies and entities are not engaged in the object and overt violation of civil rights. Now, if you think about this from a congregation context, if you are pastoring 15 or 20 people, chances are somebody has been victimized by driving while Black, many of us been racially profiled. And so oftentimes, as I think about what's happening right now, that I'll say more about after Baba makes some of his comments, there are trials happening right now in the Tyree Nichols murder. And so imagine if there was no civil rights division to carry some of these consent decrees forward, so that when the local law enforcement agencies and entities violate people's civil rights, you would have no federal oversight or no federal apparatus to hold those local municipalities and counties accountable when they engage in those types of violations. And you can go back further in our history and look at the historical context of the Department of Justice's role in protecting civil rights. And this might offset some of our conversations where we talk about, the federal government haven't done anything for Black people. It says to me that we aren't familiar enough with some of the developments, especially with the Civil Rights Act, that we understand was literally gutted several years ago. But this is still an apparatus that is in place. And it is an opportunity for us to engage and leverage some federal resources to help us with things that are happening on the ground in our communities. Furthermore, there are other elements of local pattern and practice investigations, one that's happening in Memphis right now, and these things will not take place. And we've seen it happen when Trump was in office in 2016. Many of the pattern and practice investigations that were taking place under the Obama administration were simply stopped altogether. And so to see us sitting back in a sense and either unable because we don't have the tools or the insights, or unwilling because we don't have the courage or the appetite to engage in the information campaign that our congregants need, so that they can connect these dots, that our community members need, so that they can connect these dots and see how the Department of Justice is just one element and aspect that is in the crosshairs of Project 2025, and it would have a direct impact on what's happening with many of us in our communities, from, again, the Civil Rights Division and some of those initiatives, pattern and practice investigations, or as was mentioned in the segment we just saw, the consent decrees. All of these things are very valuable and vital elements embedded within the federal infrastructure that if we sit back and allow another Trump term, we might have seen the last of in our lifetime. As it relates to the Department of Defense, for those who may not know about what that is, overall, it is in essence like local law enforcement entities and agencies, except for it is our way of engaging in public safety on a global scale. And there is some would say inordinate, I would probably say inordinate too, but definitely a substantial amount of our tax dollars go directly to the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense receives funding from our tax dollars. I think the last proposal that came from the Biden administration for 2023-24 was about $850 billion. So if you know anybody who has worked in the Pentagon, anybody who works in NSA, anybody who is in any military base, people in the CIA, people in the FBI. And one of the biggest line items is defense contracting, which is to say the government contracts with people who make bombs, for instance, or who make military equipment, whether it be the tanks or whether it be some of the guns or some of the bullets and artillery. All of this stuff comes through the Department of Defense. But what might be most notable for us is the Department of Homeland Security. And if anybody followed the trajectory of the Department of Defense, especially at the offset of 9/11 and this conversation around terrorism, now there's conversation around immigration and all of these things, the way that that department can be leveraged against Black folks in Black communities, where now they will say to somebody in your congregation, you just looked like you were an immigrant from Nigeria or from the Congo, or you just look like you were somebody who didn't belong. I mean, you can literally harken back to some of the slave codes and the Fugitive Slave Act, and it is not far-fetched to connect some of these dots. And those things are under the Department of Defense. And what Project 2025 does is attempt to take away what was like an unwritten, understood rule of nonpartisanship for anybody who was in any of those positions. And they want to appoint what we might call lackeys, people who have already publicly pledged their unbridled support to Trump. And he would be able to appoint people who would be much more about being loyal to him than they would be about enacting some of these more reasonable and robust practices that ensure public safety from a global standpoint. And so those are just a few of the direct implications that I think are related to the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense, and how it impact what would be happening in our communities and in our congregations. And I'll say more about what's happening in Memphis in particular, and other ways I think we can respond to it, but I want to pass it to Baba Bennett for some remarks as well.
Thank you, Dr. Earle. Dr. Susan Smith, we thank God for you coordinating, facilitating these much needed conversations. So much is at stake. I'm always delighted to be with my younger brother, Dr. Earle Fisher, who really set the stage and really focused it as we were in our prep conversation. I realized that been out there, been pastoring for more than 30 years. And while there are moments where I can directly relate in conversation with congregants who've been in Connecticut longer, there has been consent decrees in Bridgeport for the misbehaviors of the local police department in Hartford, Connecticut. Recently, there was the lifting of consent decrees at the protest of the community because of police brutality and other injustices. And then particularly with the organization that we were part of, local organizing organization in East Haven, Connecticut, the federal FBI had to come in because of immigrant profiling in East Haven that included the priest, my colleague, co-founder of local organizing, a Canadian priest was profiled by the East Haven police. And it again was consent decrees. It was the thin guardrails that allowed that investigation to go forth, and eventually it was a federal case. That was won by the residents there. I wanted to zoom out. Dr. Fisher gave such a great overview. We've been challenged so many issues, and I guess tonight I want to talk from the perspective of a pastor, long-term pastor who has just so many issues locally happening, and why it's important for us to include Project 2025 in the discussion and place it in priority of discussion. I know most of us bivocational, some of us are able to go full-time, so many issues. And Dr. Fisher, you even shared one time when you were sharing with us about preaching. Dr. Susan, you've come and shared. I remember Dr. Daryl Griffin talked about head people, heart people, and gut people. That there are moments where some people gather and they're motivated by what the facts that they hear. Other people are motivated by the stories they hear. Other people are motivated by just the gut of knowing something. They may not be able to articulate fully, but they know something is just not right. And I think in my congregation, I have that broad range of people who need to know, may not read all 900 plus pages, but they want to know the information. I also have people who want to hear stories. They want to hear stories of why this is so important, so that it is not just a matter of information. Yeah, they've been trying to, there's never been a time where Black folk have been safe in this country. As you stated earlier, there are other attacks to our liberties. And then there are those who, again, know something is wrong, but may not be able to articulate all the details of it. I'm hoping that tonight, between all three of us and this whole series, we'll be able to touch each person so that they might be motivated and challenged to do something, to gain more information, but not just information, but to exercise their right to make sure that that we are not placed in a position where Project 2025 comes to fruition. I was talking locally with a member of our congregation who is also executive director of a nonprofit in Connecticut, and asked them about what's happening in with their more millennial age, and I was surprised but not surprised to hear their response, to say that many non-religious nonprofits find themselves shying or timid about addressing directly Project 2025 and its implications for many of their constituents because of funding. And so there is this sense that if any institution in the Black community has the space, and I would dare say the responsibility to speak about Project 2020, it's the faith-based community. It is the church community, because in theory, we're not beholden to anyone except our congregation. And as we share this information, it is my prayer that more of our congregants, wherever they fit on the spectrum, will engage this project, to speak out against it, to talk against it, and in November to vote their conscience.
Let me ask you something, both of you. At the base of much of what is in Project 2025 is racism. People don't like to hear that, but it is racism. One of the guys who was one of the primary architects of Project 2025 said that he wants to get rid of, or they want to get rid of, multiculturalism. The former president, has said there will be mass deportations from day one, and he has said, quote, "It would be very bloody." They don't want multiculturalism. They are afraid of the browning of America. They are against DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're against affirmative action. They're against so many things. But there's this whole obsession with woke, which I don't even know if they can describe. I don't even know how they define it, but the woke, the former president said, quote, "There's woke at the top. They want there to be woke, but these guys aren't meant for woke. I would fire them. You can't have woke military. You need people that want to win. They want to win wars. That's what their purpose is, to win wars, not to be woke." When you think about that just the obsession with this wokeness, which I don't think they can define. What is the danger of that? What is the danger, number one, in them being able to implement? They're already implementing the policies, but being able to increase the implementation of the policies. And what is the danger to us, the Black community, in terms of a police department that is not woke, whatever that means?
Yeah, let me chime in a little bit on that. So one, their argument is that the Department of Defense and the Army and the Navy and the Air Force in their recruitment struggled because they had adopted too much diversity, too much equity, and too much inclusion. And so they would argue that the numbers are down because it's hard to recruit with that level of what they call wokeness. Well, part of the danger in that is if you are only looking for people who subscribe to a particular ideology, and that ideology is anti-Blackness, when it is time for that particular department to be deployed in service to their leader, it is much easier to quell any resistance because ideologically everybody shares that particular philosophy, which is Black folks don't deserve to be treated as human. And so I think that's part of their, for lack of better terms, like logic. But the danger for us is it allows that particular entity that historically has been seen as, or at least since the integration of the different factions of the Army and Navy, Air Force, during the different world wars, when they finally let Black folks, in and gave us access to some of those same weapons, then the perception is, at the very least, that you are not taking your individual philosophy or political allegiance to a particular party or a particular person into that space, because it's more about the collective upholding of a social contract and constitutional laws. So that's the primary danger of it. In the back to the micro of it, when you want to deploy the National Guard into a neighborhood because you feel like Black folks are running amok, then it is much simpler to deploy them and indiscriminately enact this kind of what we would typically call like brutality, police brutality, or violation again of civil rights. I think it's much easier to do that when you can taint the pool of applicants such that that they subscribe to the right wing ideology. So I think that's one of the primary dangers that particular angle of the project seeks to try to enact.
And one of the things, and I'm going to correct to you in a minute, Dr. Bennett, but one of the things that you mentioned, Schedule F. Did you mention Schedule F, or am I dreaming? Schedule F, which is one of the things that the former president started putting that into place before he lost the other election, the 2020 election, which he did lose. And what he wanted to do, Schedule F, means that he's going to fire these longstanding civil employees and replace them with loyalists. That is so dangerous. And we're talking in terms of numbers, about 80 to 90,000 people could stand to be fired, and they don't have any legal recourse if they are fired. They are fired. Now that's going to affect African-American congregations, because, people say, oh, that's federal jobs, that's just in DC. No, federal jobs are all over the country. And so if this administration gets in and it does what it wants to do, there are going to be many people who will find themselves potentially unemployed because they're not loyalists. Have you thought about that, Reverend Bennett? And is that a conversation that you have had with maybe some of the members of your congregation?
So on a personal level, though he's deceased, my father was a Korean War veteran. Many of the issues that Dr. Fisher spoke about, he lived through. It is this question of loyalty, loyalty to white ideology and white normalization of life, so that we as Black and brown people have always been recruited to transcend our race, to transcend that, so that we would buy into what was considered the American dream, but it was really the white version of that understanding. And I think the danger in this Project 2025 is to return to that understanding, not to return to it, but to continue that without any break or any mixture of dimension. A part of my own congregation who served, and in talking with some of them, and it's not just elders. I have members in our congregation who are also serving proudly in branches, because for them, they feel that this is a part of their duty to give back. Part of their conversation, though, part of our conversation is this sense that somehow or another, if we keep being faithful, if we keep doing the work, then somehow or another acceptance will come. I think Project 2025 says, No.
No. Right.
It's like you can be just as faithful, but the reality is you're being faithful to the vision of America as it was founded, not as what the way it is becoming in terms of a more brown nation.
Yeah, and the obsession with whiteness, nobody wants to talk about white. Everybody said you're saying the R word when white people play the racist card all the time. This is the racist card. They just pulling out but it's always been up underneath in almost every policy that we have. And there's nothing that you can do. I don't care what ethnicity you are. You can be Chinese, you can be Japanese, you can be Filipino. There is no amount of service to the country that you can do that will eliminate this sting, this stigma, or this, I'm losing my words, but this thing of whiteness. It's an obsession. It's an obsession. And so people have historically thought, right? Well, if I just go, I fight in World War I fight in World War II, I'm gonna come home with people, Black people in uniform, coming home from both world wars were lynched. They were lynched, and nobody did anything about it. And so, with this assault on the Justice Department, the safeguards, the few safeguards or pieces of justice that we have stand to be eliminated, which is a great risk for the Black community. We have a question here. This question says, I live in Florida. Florida has been the test lab for some of the proposals in Project 2025. If we are able to defeat him, does that mean we will be able to ward off these efforts, or can states put their own measures in place as Florida has done? Reverend Earle, you take that one, please.
Yeah, well, so states can attempt to put in place these particular measures, and this is why down ballot elections are so valuable, because there are always limits to the executive office, or to put it another way, the presidents can only do so much.
Until
And that's
now,
why it's
unless this comes to
right. So, but she's asking if we do defeat him,
okay.
then the states will try to carry some of the same measures out. Take Tennessee, for instance. You're talking to a brother who had to fight with the state legislature because they wanted to ban the study of reparations in the state of Tennessee. And so it is helpful when you have a federal government to provide that particular type of oversight. So there are still laws that are being passed here locally that the city council has to fight with the state about getting implemented. But if you don't have the federal government that would provide that level of oversight, then ultimately we see what a Supreme Court is. And it would probably be worse if we don't keep Trump out of office in this election. But to your basic point, the states could try, but this is why you want not only a presidency, you want a Congress that could support whatever measures and methods a president sees as their vision for protections at the state and at the local level.
Yeah, it's a dangerous time. Go ahead, Reverend Bennett. Go ahead.
Go ahead. What are you gonna say?
No, go ahead.
What I want to share was to Dr. Fisher's point, which goes back to the earlier introduction framing. Apathy doesn't necessarily just come up out of the air. Apathy is a mixture of, if it's not one thing, it's 25. And you speak to this, Brother Earle speaks to, it's not only the office of the presidency, but it's down ballot. It's not only engaging down ballot, but it's in between elections, showing up at the Common Council meetings. It's showing up at the Board of Education meetings, so that when they talk about banning the books, you're able. Now, I don't know about you all. Maybe but that's exhausting.
It is.
Because when you are the only one or one of 5 or 6 that are showing up, I think in my 3 decades, I've learned to still push people, and I still do that. But I've learned that apathy is on some level a response to just the onslaught and where the Heritage Foundation has resources, think tank, personnel, staff to come up, and then 50-year history with Reagan to perfect their craft. We're seemingly always having to respond in the midst of doing funerals, in the midst of doing all this other stuff. So, I'm going to be honest, sometimes I'm tender when people critique the Black church, because most people don't follow me to do half the stuff that I got to do that's not made on camera. So, and I would speak for other pastors too. All right. There is this constant onslaught that we have to figure out how to stagnate and how to renew. And I think forums like these will hopefully help us learn to renew, take the stigma. Pastors, you don't have to know everything. None of us know everything. There is no stigma of not knowing. That's why we have a community of people who will learn and know what you do. I have people, I have a small staff of people who do voter registration, who have some of these things, because I can't do this all by myself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that one of the values, hopefully, of these conversations is that we are giving people enough information that will inspire them, that will say, shoot, I'm going to register to vote. I'm going to do something, because nobody has the I don't know, the luxury of sitting by and just letting things kind of go the way they want them to go. But according to the document, this if Project 2025 is fully implemented, the former president, who wants to be the dictator, please remember that, y'all, please hear me when I say that, he has pledged to open up civil rights investigations into what he calls radical leftist prosecutors' offices, end quote, that, quote, refuse to charge criminals, end quote. Y'all tell me who the criminals are. Who is he talking about here?
So of course he's talking about Black folks. I can put you right back in the lap of what's happening in Memphis and Shelby County, because in the last municipal election, we were able to remove a very conservative and run-of-the-mill district attorney who never prosecuted a police-involved shooting in Memphis or Shelby County, with one who is definitely leaning more, not perfect, of course, but definitely leaning more towards the progressive side. And so what has happened is you had a state senator and you've had the entirety of the state Congress, which is, well, I won't say the entirety of it, that wouldn't be true. But the state of Tennessee has a super majority in Congress. And so their aim has been to remove the power that he has and kind of replace him with somebody who they would appoint. And so this is the same thing that Trump is attempting to do with Project 2025. He's saying, if you are in a place where the district attorney is engaged in any kind of progressive measures, so think about how they prosecuted Mike Brown's killer in St. Louis, you know, how they tried to prosecute Breonna Taylor's people, but the district attorney of Kentucky kind of stopped them, or the attorney general of Kentucky kind of tried to stop that. Those are the same dynamics that we see kind of at play, and they want to implement it on the federal level. I think what people should fundamentally understand is, if we are going to live in a nation of laws, which we claim we are, then somebody has to enforce them, and who enforces them matters. And the separation of powers, when you start talking about local, which has to succeed to the county, and then the county has to succeed to the state. Where our historical defense has been is when we are at the federal level, able to leverage the federal. That's why certain states, especially in the South, call the federal government Big Brother, because they don't like to be told what to do. And so if we can collectively organize as a community around these issues that are very, very valuable to us and taking place within our communal and congregational context, we have an opportunity as a Black faith community to actually have an impact here. And we can do what I think Baba Bennett was trying to tell us to do. I don't think that we have to have all of the answers as the Black faith community, but I do think we have to be committed to engaging in, and when necessary, curating and cultivating the conversations that get us access to the information. And so I know 900 pages is an amount that most people are not going to read, if we're being honest, in their lifetime. And I'm not saying that I expect every pastor to read it, but I think what is helpful is when pastors can acknowledge how important the document is in grounding us in the political theology that is taking place then it provides us with an opportunity to learn and also to engage and empower people to activate themselves and the organizations and institutions that are doing work in the areas that are important to us. So again, this is not just about us giving somebody a series of talking points. Yes, we can say, here are 10 things, or here are 15 or 20 things to take from Project 2025. I think what is more important is for us to say, here are the tools that we can use as a congregation and as a Black faith community to try to engage in robust and necessary conversation or education initiatives so that our people feel more invested in what's going to happen and feel empowered to make something happen that is in alignment with their vision for their own lives.
Yeah. I think that, and I'm going to take a couple of questions in a minute, but I think that one of the things that what both of you are saying and you're alluding to is that freedom isn't free. Freedom is not free. You have to work for it. And I often compare working for democracy to working for your salvation, right? I always tell people, too many of us in the church, I'm just going to speak from my own experience, but too many of us in the church have what I call a sitting by the dock of the bay theology. We just going to sit. And I was saved and I'm good. And you have to work. I mean, you really have to work to do what Jesus said to be, to be fully, to realize what salvation even means. And I think that with democracy, you have to work. What happens is we go, some of us go, some of us don't bother to go. We go and vote and we think whatever happens, happens. We have power. Our vote is our power and we don't realize it. And I can't tell you how many people said my vote doesn't count. Your vote does count. Every single vote does count. It does. But when we don't vote, we just give power away. We just give our power away, and then things are bad, and then we don't want to do anything because we're exhausted and we're frustrated. But if we are on the battlefield, and it is exhausting, as Reverend Bennett said, it is exhausting. It'll take the marrow out of your bones. But the only way that we get our freedom and then keep our freedom is to work for it, which means that, like right in through here, we register people to vote, we register, we ask other people, get people to do phone banking and texting. It's work. And if everybody works, then we have a chance. But we have to work for our freedom and we have to work to keep our freedom. And people don't realize that. Well, there's a question here that said, we referenced the 50-year history and resources of the Heritage Foundation. What about our institutions, the NAACP, for example? And I'm going to throw some out. I'm going to say, the NAACP has been active, sporadically. Let me say that, maybe sporadically. I'm going to get in trouble. But because what happens is, I think what's happened is that when you work really hard for something, you push against the walls of injustice, like how people pushed against the walls of injustice to try to get in segregation, the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and all that. You work, you get your head beat, you get, it's awful. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And then you get a victory and you're tired. You just get tired. And you don't, and I think one of the things that happens when we are fighting for justice, we don't realize that as we are working, we have to also be training the younger people who are coming behind us, right? So this is a relay, right? I love the Olympics. It just, I love the 4x4. I love the relay because you get them, they get the rhythm and stuff, and you come on now, and then and they don't even look back. They got that arm out and they're going, and that's what we have to do. We have to train people. We're going now. We're going. We've gotten our little part done, because it is the little part in the grand scheme of things, but we're handing that baton on. And that's one of the things I think for this person that asked this question that we have to do, that, NAACP, needs some, sometimes they need some help. I think all the time, all of us need some help to help each other. What do you say, guys, say to that? Because she wants to know, what about
I want to share, but I want Dr. Earle to use, he preached a very powerful word this past week at the 30th commemoration of the Ma'afa in St. Paul Community Baptist Church in Brooklyn. And he used that same analogy. Dr. Earle, would you speak that, and then I'll share?
Yeah, just that it's a Sankofa moment for all of us, that as the 4x1 meter relay was happening with the Black women, when Gabby Thomas was running, Sha'Carri Richardson had to take off before she got there, right? And so I think, so I'll elaborate on it a little bit deeper than I did Sir Monica. I think sometimes we get frustrated within our communities because the elders are fussing at the young folks for taking off running before they got there. And then the young folks sometimes don't do what Sha'Carri Richardson did, which is what we're trained to do. Yes, you take off running before you get there. But the Sankofa moment is while you're leaning forward, you have to reach back. And I think sometimes they refuse to reach back. And then one analogy I've used before in referencing relay races, as you did, Dr. Smith, is somebody dropped a baton and we spent far too long arguing. I mean, the race is going on, folks are running, and we just sitting up there talking about, well, you dropped it, well, somebody needs to pick it up and just start by running. Here's what I would say as I pass it back to you, Baba, about the NAACP, and I think we need to be honest about it, right? So for whatever criticisms we have in recent years, when you start talking about legal strategy work, you have to give credit and credence to the NAACP and the Legal Defense Fund, which is still in existence to this day. And some of the things that I think our faith communities have to be better at doing is reclaiming and restoring that history so that we aren't simply criticizing some of our legacy institutions from a place of misinformation. It's not that they aren't doing anything or that they haven't done anything. And then sometimes we take for granted the amount of resources that they were able to obtain and corral. And for some of us who are trying to, obtain some resources, we should, kind of tip our hats to them. But at the end of the day, it's definitely important for us to work both angles. Somebody has to be running, and you have to understand that the person running ahead of you is going to take off before you get there. And everybody has to run that leg of the race. But when it is your turn, you cannot take off running without reaching back.
I think, Doc, thank you, Doc, for elaborating. You preached it on Wednesday, because I think, Doc Smith, that's the issue. We can be frustrated, but I think a part of the sobering reality is we critique our present based on a distorted view of our past.
Right.
Because the reality is there was never everybody working on behalf of civil rights.
Ever.
There was never everybody working. There was always a smaller group of people. We're not the first ones to be frustrated with colleagues in ministry speaking out, Ida B. Wells. And the reason why I think we have to bring the ancestors in to this, because if we just do it with our own focus, Project 2025, we'll either burn ourselves out or we will become jaded. Because again, most of the people that come in my church on Sunday are not concerned about Project 2025. And I would say, just like most people. And as a pastor, I've got a rhythm putting it before them. But also I asked, and I pray he wouldn't mind. I asked Pastor Starsky Wilson, when the Ferguson uprisings were happening, did he speak about the Ferguson uprising every Sunday? And he said no, because they had to live, they had to learn, they had to regroup, they had to gather. And I think a part of the NAACP, what they do, we respect what they do. They have to hand the baton, but I learned that some of these young folks, they're not going to do it the way that I learned to do it.
Right.
And I have to work through that to realize, just like when I was their age, coming and all out in the community and all out in the streets, that I had to learn that I was going to do it differently than the people who did it during the 70s and 80s in Bridgeport. Right. So I think it's perspective and the wisdom of the elders that will give us wisdom and tenacity to deal with what we must deal with today.
Right.
Project 2025 today.
One of the things that we're not really talking about, because last week we talked about Health and Human Services, but the attack on the Justice Department will have an effect on women's health rights. Many local prosecutors have pledged not to bring cases against people who have had or provided abortions. And because the legal terrain remains unsettled since the overturn of Roe v. Wade, J.D. Vance, for example, previously urged the Department of Justice to crack down on the mailing of abortion pills, yada, yada, yada. My point is that with this heightened antipathy, this heightened antagonism toward women and their health rights and stuff, we are not protected, but the police will not protect us. Is that something that you talk about in your congregations?
So I partner with several reproductive justice organizations here locally. Sister Reach is probably the premier one, and they actually have I don't think they mind me sharing this. They have a religion and faith symposium coming up here in October that I think is going to reach across the country in some real righteous and revolutionary ways. But I think the point that you're bringing up. So do I talk about it? Yes. And do I try to make sure I'm partnering with organizations? Yes. Is it a every Sunday thing? I think to Baba Bennett's point, we're juggling so many things. This is why you partner with organizations that are doing righteous and revolutionary work. So that when the issue, this is my note to pastors, when the issue comes up, you don't have to be the resident expert in everything.
Right.
But you should be someone who has been doing enough community engagement work so that when the issue comes up, I say, talk to Reverend Cherie Scott, talk to Elder Elsie Salisbury, right? Like these are the people who are doing that work. And I've partnered with the Planned Parenthood here locally. I was on the board for a while. I'm on the board for an organization called Friends for All. I've worked with Choices, and I think everybody should survey their community and figure out which organizations are doing these righteous and wonderful things in the name of healthcare, reproductive rights, reproductive justice, and provide them with platforms to share with your congregation. But to your point, Dr. Smith, about protection, we're right back to the Department of Defense, right? You're right back to the apparatus that is going to be employed and empowered to be deployed to protect people's civil rights. But if they are under the ideology that the people who are seeking this kind of health care are violating laws, not only will they not protect you, they're going to be the ones coming to apprehend you when they say you've crossed state lines to go get your healthcare procedure done. They're not going to deploy the local law enforcement. They're going to deploy National Guard. They're going to be deploying U.S. Marshals, okay? And these will be the people who have the ideology and the mentality of the person who appointed them. So it does circle back again to the implications of this particular project, even when you start talking about healthcare protections. Yes, it does.
Right. It changes the whole landscape in terms of us feeling like we're a country where we can protest against what we think is unjust. It changes everything. Go ahead, Dr. Bennett. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I want you to continue. My thing to Dr. Fisher's point, you don't have to be the resident expert. I lift up Bishop John Selters in Connecticut. He has been sort of a partner around some of these social justice issues, particularly women's reproductive rights, as he has been on the vanguard, both locally, nationally, and then also in our state. And so again, I'm speaking to the pastors, to those who not necessarily are those who want to do something, partner. In this moment, why we're having Samuel DeWitt Proctor conference talk about this, it is to make sure that we're partnering and being in relationship with each other, because this is much more than any one of us in one church, in one denomination can tackle.
Yeah, we're just not we're not I don't think we're even prepared for what a drastic change this whole thing would be for all of us. When we talk about, I think there's a cross referencing or cross relationship between the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense. So firing top officers is one of the many ways Project 2025 will seek to rebuild a military that it now refers to as Barack Obama's General Officer Corps. So in addition to calling for firing and freezing promotions for generals, Project 2025 also wants to rebuild and retrain the military, and it would require, and this is what we don't talk about this, but it would require all public schools to administer the military entrance exam for recruitment. And the document also calls for the reinstatement of active duty members who refused COVID vaccines and restoring their rank. Thoughts on that? You're muted.
All right. Let me share. Both as a pastor, I'm against that for so many different reasons in terms of coercing anyone, and then as a father of a 17-year-old young man who would fall into that category, may fall into that category, I am so against it. And again, that's why we must speak out against it. That would literally just the step toward the draft. That is just unacceptable in this moment of time.
Totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Only thing I would add to that is how it exacerbates the political ideology of it all, because now it is still a response to the first Black president being in office, and how they want to erase any traces of, even when it's not true, right? Like for those of us who have really watched the trajectory and the development of the federal government, there was no drastic change in military philosophy. I mean, President Obama dropped more drones and bombs than his predecessor did. So the idea that somehow the military drastically changed under the Obama administration is just factually incorrect. But that becomes the symbol and the flashing light to reify the anti-Blackness that is part and parcel of the country's ideology and philosophy. So again, to Baba's point, what we should do as faith communities is make sure we're articulating this kind of information in a very reasonable and righteous but still robust way, so that, because here's what I think I'm trying to say in a sense. For many of our congregational constituents, if they don't hear it from us,
That's
or
right.
if we don't organize a space for them to hear it, so they ain't got to hear it directly from you. I'm saying if we don't curate a space for them to hear it and hear it in a way that is palatable, they won't hear it at all.
At all.
And so, because Dr. Smith, you were saying a second ago, like this kind of snuck up on us in a sense, but not, I would say not necessarily. What happened was we often were purposefully asleep at the wheel because we did not collectively have the courage to say what we did not know. We did not have the humility to sit at the feet or be in relationship with people who knew it. And now here we are. And too many of us have presented ourselves as the expert on all things. I'm saying to the Black faith community, I'm saying to Black faith leaders in particular, this is not the time to allow our egos to get in the way. This is the time to be honest with the people who we are called to lead and the people who we claim to love, that we need to get them access to this information in short order.
Yeah, and that's why we're having these conversations. I was thinking as both of you are talking about how if we have had a relatively, I don't know, safe environment. I mean, it's not like a blatant police state like there are in other places. Not blatant. It's fixing to be blatant. Does that make sense? I mean, it's bad here. It's bad, but it can be worse. They want it to be worse. So in police states, they can come up and they can do, if you're having a protest, because one of the freedoms that we have right now, the freedom of, quote, peaceful assembly, they want to take that away. So if we have the freedom now to go out in the streets and, protest. And even though we're often, as Black people, we are attacked, for being violent. We're not violent. They're violent, but we're attacked. But under Project 2025, if it is a police state, which is what the proponents of this thing want it to be, they can come and they can do mass shootings or mass arrests. Y'all hear what I'm talking about? Do you hear me? And I don't know that our people understand that. Why am I saying that? Because I need for us to understand how critical it is for us to understand what's going on and to then, register to vote and do what we're going to do. But mass arrests, and that happens in police states. Look at Putin. Anytime he don't like what somebody does, all of a sudden somebody falls out a window or drinks some poison tea or something. And the police officers they're loyal to. I have been mortified by the cowardice of our white lawmakers, the male lawmakers. They're just so afraid because they're afraid that they're going to be called a name or they're going to lose their position. They cower in fear, and fear kills people. Fear kills people. So have you ever had conversations, or maybe there's an opportunity to have like a congregational meeting to talk about what this means in terms of this becoming a police state under, the proposed Project 2025? Is that something that's even necessary, do you think?
So let me just again back up. Dr. Smith, I know, I wasn't around. Dr. Fisher, I don't think were around. I'm not sure if you were around. So my parents grew up in Mississippi, in right, where Emmett Till in Winona, Mississippi. So part of the reason why my mother didn't talk about it was lynchings were natural and a normal part, and police could pull you out as individuals in any moment. So certainly not police state the way we've seen in other countries, but I think again an accurate understanding of our history of those, and some of the congregants in New England came from North Carolina, South Carolina. I have a leader who would never return to South Carolina because of some of the de facto police state that he experienced. Now, this is no competition, which is better, which is worse. No, I'm saying we've certainly made progress, certainly as I've understood. I think some of our congregants have been so far removed from those moments that those moments seem to escape their mind. So this is a return to what a variation of a more sophisticated but still direct way of what was, in terms of pulling you out. I have leaders who are immigrants who don't have all their papers, and we've had to do some local, some state stuff based on the lack of coverage in terms of the federal, the possibility of federal. So there's always been this kind of threat. Now, again, like we said, the guardrails are just coming out, and it's just, we're going to do what we've been doing, but we're going to do it directly now.
Right. And it's very scary. James White in our chat says that people don't believe that this police state thing will happen. It already is happening, but they don't, like Mr. White says, they don't believe that it can get as bad as these people want to get. At the other part of that, so there's this anti-immigration thing, anti-brown, people think that just because they were born in America and their mama and daddy were born in Mississippi, that they won't be, police can pick you up and accuse you of anything. Come on now. And if it's a police state, if they don't like the way you look, right? I mean, that's like driving while black. You can get stopped just because you're driving while black. If they look at you, and the rule of law means that if the person is an immigrant, then he or she can be pulled up, arrested, and quote, put in a camp or deported. People don't realize that we are all in danger. We are all in danger of being mistakenly on purpose, put up and put aside as an immigrant. That's scary to me. And especially since so you have the Project 2025, well, they want to arrest prosecutors who will not prosecute criminals, and they define who the criminals are, right? So it's a hot mess. It's a hot mess, and it's a no-win for people who are already being bothered and harassed by police officers. So it's a major thing. And I think about that mass deportation thing all the time. We don't know who's going to get picked up. I mean, we really don't. I mean, Sandra Bland is dead. Why is she dead? Or, people die just because they're walking down the street, which has always been the case in this country. But now they want to make it like this is just the law of the land, openly. Wasn't openly before. Now it's openly, or they're proposing for it to be openly. What is our responsibility to our communities in teaching that?
So if you think about the way white legislators and blackface power brokers have sought to ban books, part of the reason that they are being banned is because people don't want us to share these historical narratives, because they can be pinpointed into ways to perceive what's happening in the present. So you say, as you just did, or as Baba just did, you got Emmett Till, Sandra Bland, or Tyree Nichols, right? Trayvon Martin, so on and so forth. And you can kind of thread that needle in ways that are reasonable enough for people to comprehend the connections, even though we don't see the immediate severity of it. I think we could see a glimpse of what could be, and it's no longer as far removed as it used to be. So of course, our responsibility is to like I would love to see Black pastors host book clubs where you only are dealing with the books that your state or your region has banned, right? If they say banned, it'd be like, well, good, okay, cool. So this is what they say banned, and this is the one that we're gonna study.
We're gonna read it.
Yeah, right. So that would be great. But I also want to address something that's in the comments, because I think there's a sentiment out there. And so Terry Ann Smith has been asking, like, what do we do as a Black community if Trump loses? And I think that there's some anxieties around, kind of like a white revolution of it all. And so I think that can be overstated in a sense. And I think that plays on our psyche, because there are, no doubt about it, historical instances where the white lash or the white mobs kind of rose up, right? What made those historical moments as valuable as they were is that they had a federal government that supported it and bagged it up during Reconstruction. Right. And so part of what we are amplifying right now is those things would be more likely if there was another Trump presidency, because he can ideologically place these ideologues in the most strategic and important and impactful places. But if he doesn't, I'm not as worried about the entirety of the Department of Defense being leveraged against Black freedom.
Okay.
I'm not as concerned with if there is a Department of Justice, okay, then I think that tempers some, and we see it happening right now with the prosecution of folks in the Proud Boys and some of these other January 6th folks. People really, like, hundreds of people went to jail, which would not be the case. Okay.
Right.
So the idea that there might be, and I'm just going to be 100% frank about it. Like, I know Black folks in Black communities. I just don't see white folks coming to Black communities wanting that smoke like that. I just don't see that. Now, I know I'm speaking from in a sense of place of privilege, because Memphis is 65% Black, the Blackest city in the country, right? And so I don't want to dismiss what that might mean for people who live in Iowa, or Black folks who live in Idaho, or Black folks who live in Wyoming, and some of that. Maybe we need to discuss, a return to the South for Black folks. But, and I'm serious when I say that. But more importantly, I am saying I am not as overtly concerned about some white uprising, because I know they ain't coming to South Memphis or North Memphis or Whitehaven.
They ain't gonna do that.
Matter of fact, I dare you to come to Whitehaven or North Memphis or South Memphis with that. I think you'll see, the same way that they've been flooding Black communities with these guns. Like, I Okay.
You know, that reminds me of the story, the Deacons of Defense during the 60s. The Deacons of Defense got their guns shooting. They were not deacons, so they called themselves deacons that got them guns, and they dared white people, come on over here if you feel like you're bad enough.
And some of them were deacons. Some
Yeah.
of them were literally
Were
deacons.
deacons,
Yeah, and many of them were returning from war. They were literally trained, and there's a whole book about it. This nonviolence doesn't get you killed. There's a whole book about it. You can read about it, and it'll tell you about the Deacons of Defense, or you can read about the NAACP. As you talk about the NAACP, let's talk about Robert Williams and the NAACP in North Carolina. You know, and so again, if we think about this historically, we have plenty of people now who have military experience. I got a guy in my congregation right now with plenty of military experience, right? Who is heading the Deacons of Defense at Abyssinia. And so I think that's definitely something for us to revisit. And so maybe that's a book club. But again, I think when you start looking at that in the framework of the Department of Defense, it lets you know how crucial this could be if we do not stop them from, you know, revising and reconstituting what that particular department would be about.
Right. We have one
my beloved said the Deacons of Defense for this generation will include some sisters. Yes, some
you know
sisters.
she's right. She knows she's right.
But it included sisters then too.
It
I mean,
did.
check the book out. It included sisters then too. There were sisters who stood on the porch all night long with the shotguns, waiting. You know what I'm saying? And some of them received training from some of the people who have been in the armed forces. So yes, Sister Bennett, my dear sister, it absolutely will, because it already has.
Right. We have one more short video clip that I think is ready. Marcus, are you ready? Can you pull that up?
Our fellow citizens should Trump issue an illegal order.
Joining me now is retired Army Major General Paul Eaton, Senior Advisor to Vote Vets. General Eaton, thank you so much for being here. We know from his history that Donald Trump asked Mark Esper, his defense secretary, whether he could shoot protesters in the legs or something after the George Floyd protest broke out. Trump told the U.S. general to just shoot protesters. That is a claim in a book previously. How much worse could it get with Project 2025 empowering him?
Joy, thank you for having Vote Vets on tonight. Very much our honor to be here. So the moral compass of the United States Armed Forces is extraordinary. We work it very hard. We make sure that every young American comes in to be a great soldier, airman, Marine, sailor, and we send them back to American homes better than they came in. That moral compass is what Mr. Trump is attacking. And it's something that we work very hard to resist. The great fear that some of us have is that he will in place a structure of firing, of dismissing, of retiring, and a selection process that will try to dismantle that moral compass. It's that which every voter needs to understand, and every voter needs to make sure he understands, she understands going into the voting booth on 5 November.
You know, he's talked about bringing Michael Flynn back in, General Michael Flynn, who was driven out partly because he pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about talking to the Russians. He has pledged to allegiance to QAnon, and Donald Trump has said he'd bring his like and him personally back in. You know, with people like that in the military again, in positions of power, can you envision Donald Trump deploying the United States military against American citizens and having the military actually harm U.S. citizens? Would they even do that?
Joy, if you pick the right people, and over 100 retired generals and admirals signed a document that challenged the results of the last election and who challenged the nature of President Biden and his ability to serve. If you dig hard enough, and if you allow Mike Flynn to dig hard enough, he will find enough miscreants that were otherwise dismissed from service to positions of authority where they would be able to have a selection process that would frustrate that which we do so well, and that is create a chain of command that is beholden and subservient to the Constitution of the United States. That's where we are. We take an oath to.
Yeah, so that's just, we could talk about this stuff forever. The point of these conversations is to give people some tidbits of what is in this 900 some odd page report. And Dr. Fisher and Dr. Bennett, you have been very, 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 very helpful to us. I'm hoping that this is opening the eyes and the ears and the curiosity of people who are listening. People have been putting in the chat websites that you can go to, and I urge you to do it. If you don't like to read, there's plenty of videos that you can go and you can get information about it, but you need to know about it. All of us need to know what's going on, because I want us to know what's going to affect us as Black people. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, I want, everybody to be safe, obviously, but I really want us as Black people to know what's at stake for us. So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Bennett, to give a closing statement, and then you, Dr. Fisher, do the same, and then we'll ask Reverend Durr to come on for a few seconds.
So again, thank you for this great conversation. Thank you for this great conversation. My hope and prayer is pastors will realize you're not in this by yourself. But so much is at stake, and we cannot afford not to incorporate this into our everyday sermons and ministries and Bible studies and community conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
I echo those sentiments, Baba, and I would say to anybody who wants to know very simply, like, what is at stake in this, especially as it relates to the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense, simply ask yourself, why didn't the January 6th insurrection work? The reason it didn't work is because there were people in law enforcement capacities, and there were people in legal oversight capacities that can not only stop them from doing it, but prosecute them for doing it too. And so if we don't do this time, there will be inevitably another January 6th at some point. And there will be far too many people in alignment with the Trumpian ideology for us to stop it. So I would hope, to the same points Baba said, we do all we can to have these conversations in our communities for those who need, some assistance in trying to figure out how to incorporate this stuff, whether it's in your congregation or in your sermonic material. I'm sure the Proctor Network has plenty of people outside. I'm sure Baba and I are willing to do all we can to help too, but there's a whole network of people who we think can help out, and so it's always good to be with the Proctor Network. And so thank y'all for allowing us to have some conversation.
Thank you for being here. Thank you so much, and thank all of you online who have been with us. We hope that we have these conversations available the day after, so you can go on our website and you can pull up these conversations, and please feel free to share them with anybody you want to share them with. The work is to get the word out. We have 44 days until the election. We have about two weeks before the last day to register to vote, I think. So we have a lot of work to do, but the information that we get out is really, really critical. I want to thank my friends, Dr. Fisher and Dr. Bennett. I want to thank you for being here with us. Just makes me feel really, really good to have your presence and your knowledge. It's very, very helpful. And for all of you who are watching, we encourage you to, if you believe in the work that the Proctor organization is doing, we encourage you to invest in our work. I never say donate, because donate sounds like you're doing somebody a favor. I want you to invest, because when you invest, you expect a return, and we want to give you a return. So you can give to us on our website or by Givelify. We can put that information up in a second. We also want to encourage you to register for our conference that's coming up in February 17th through the 20th. It's going to be in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I'm thinking about Dr. Bennett and Dr. Fisher. I'm thinking, Lord Jesus, I hope that we go there with this election having gone the way we needed it to go, and with all the certifications done. Oh my goodness, it gives me the creeps. I don't even know how Thanksgiving is going to be this year. I'm just saying. But hopefully we're going to go and we're going to have bells on our toes, because we would have done the work of trying to save our democracy, which is what this is all about. And even though this democracy isn't perfect and has not been perfect with Black people, it's better than the alternative that they're trying to give us. So that conference is February 17th through the 20th. You can register online. There are registration links that you can get. And again, if you're going to invest in our work, you can go to our website, sdpconference.info/legacy-fund, or our Cash App is $SDPCINC. And it's in the chat if I said that too fast. So Reverend Durr, are you around, or do you want to give us the closing word, Reverend Damian Durr? Maybe he's not.
He's not on, Reverend Sue.
He's not on. Okay. Well, in his absence, we want to thank you. And again, thank you, everybody. Please share these videos. And I mean, yeah, these links, share them, talk about them, fire people up, let them know something. When you get done talking with anybody you're talking with, make them go away with something, with saying, I didn't know that. If you can tell something to somebody and they say, shoot, I did not know that, then you are doing the work of saving democracy. Amen, 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 amen. So everybody have a good night. God bless you. God bless you. And we will see you. Listen, I'm hoping we can see some victory in this election. I'm not telling nobody how to vote, but I'm just saying that I hope that we're going to have a really good victory.